So before Doc starts tonight, because he's really going to be divulging into a lot of infection things, we just wanted to clear up what are the different types of things that can create infection, like viral, bacterial, and fungal. So the differences between, fairly simple, which seems, bacteria and viral seem to be the ones that get the most confusion. Bacteria, single-celled organism, definitely causes fever, body aches, pains. Sometimes diarrhea will go with the bacteria. Usually bacteria only hits one single organ or problem system, whereas viral requires a living host to work with. The living host, which can be us, it can be plant, or it can be animal, to create the viral. And the viral tends to hit systemically. It'll hit more than one section. In bacterial, as you know, antibiotics definitely work to combat those. Some of your probiotics also work as well. But viral antibiotics really don't cover them. They won't even hit them, won't even change it. Sometimes it'll actually make the problem worse. So that's where a lot of the ear infections, they'll get better and then they'll get worse afterwards. And that's because it's actually a viral issue and not a bacterial that you're dealing with. Fungal. Very simple, mainly caused by Candida albicans. It's such the big one now, or Aspergillus. Both of those single-celled. And what happens there is if you have a healthy immune system and you're a functioning immune system, usually a fungal infection is only going to affect the skin. If for some reason you have an unhealthy immune system, then it's going to go internally and it'll affect other things. So the healthy immune system will you'll get like the white crusties on the skin. The unhealthy immune system, that's where we'll tend to get more of the toe fungus, the change in colors of the nails, and a lot of yeast overgrowth in the intestinal tract. Now, fungal infections are very simple infections, but very hard to eradicate. They tend to be stuck there for a long time. So that's when you hear people say, oh, I deal with a Candida infection. They're dealing with that every 3 to 4 months. They constantly have to work to heal their body. Yes, they'll be over it, but then one thing can set it off, and the fungal infection will keep coming back. So once you have an overload, it's very easy to re-overload a fungal infection. So very simple, but sometimes a little bit more difficult when you're looking at that. So hopefully it'll help a little bit as he's talking about the different ologies tonight. So.
Some notes on the of things that just jumped out at me, because as I was thinking about throwing up slides that pertain, how do you throw up slides from 36 researchers and do any justice to a lifetime of work? So we're not going to attempt that. We're going to go through a quick review of some of the research that's out there, and then we're going to take some of that research and make that into an expanded topic sometime to keep you at the cutting edge of evolution, as they would say. The whole theme of these meetings was chronic, persistent infections. And it's dysfunction from food trauma, bugs, immune dysregulation, affecting us in many different ways, from Alzheimer's to cancer to certain autoimmune disorders. It's amazing how far the spectrum goes, and we don't really think about it that way. Let's take cancer, for instance. When I was going to school, 5% of cancers were thought to be viral. Yeah, leukemias especially. They thought, okay, this is it's related. We knew that because in cats, when they get leukemia, it's definitely a viral disease. At least that's what we thought back then. Do we still recognize it as such, Dr. Stacy? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then we went to 10%. Just 5 years ago, 20% of cancers are considered viral. Today, we consider 30% of all cancers to be viral. See where the trend is going on this one? It's really moving fast. I don't know where it's going to end up, but obviously viruses affect us tremendously. I know that German research right now that's emerging, it seems like these viruses tend to go dormant, we have just fragments in our body, and as soon as we are in a weakened state due to either age, malnutrition, accumulation of toxins, certain stresses that we don't know about, these viruses can regroup themselves and all of a sudden reactivate. So at that point they start causing DNA damage, triggering cancer. So fascinating research. So, but the trouble that we have when we analyze cancer cells is that there's no viruses there. And that's why this has remained hidden for so long. Because once the cell goes into a cancer cell, it actually will repel the virus that caused it in the first place and kill it. So by the time we detect cancer and do an analysis of it, the virus is gone. Fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, they're like monkeys on the back, and then the monkeys get shoved off. So, one that was covered was prostate cancer. And we know that the more sexual partners that someone has, the higher the rate of prostate cancer. And we have finally figured out that the herpes simplex #2 virus is behind that. There's a higher chance of catching this virus, obviously, with these men that are more promiscuous, and it is directly associated with prostate infections and thus cancer. So, cardiovascular disease, viral, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, I'll talk about that. Schizophrenia, all viral related. Does that mean that was the only thing going? No. Okay, but this was about viruses and bacteria and fungi, so that's what the focus of the topic is all about. Okay. So one thing that has been a really recent finding is the antibiotics resistant bugs. What do we do about them? Because these are super bugs, and we have finally figured out how they do it. They do it by creating a biofilm. And a biofilm is nothing more than a jelly-like matrix. It literally looks like that under a microscope, that the bacteria embeds itself in. It's called a biofilm, and the immune system can't get to it. It is totally, it's like a layer of Teflon. And it is so fascinating because these biofilms are not just a tiny little speck, but it can cover an entire joint. See? And that is then the biofilm for that joint to be destroyed by these bacteria. It can cover the entire length of the gut. And it can harbor both the bacteria, funguses, or viruses, but especially the fungus. And that is why fungus can be so incredibly difficult to eradicate. So biofilm, be looking for that in the literature as far as newspaper articles at some point. I'm pretty sure that word is going to come out in the very near future. So colon bugs, so that's part of your large intestine obviously, can produce all kinds of toxins such as ammonia. And that ammonia is what causes schizophrenia. They have finally found it. That was, again, a 3-hour lecture right there that I just gave you. But it's ammonia that causes schizophrenia, which is a byproduct of bugs fermenting food a certain way. I had a funny moment there because when I have a very intense run, and I had one over there, I was running up a mountain. It was a 6.5 mile run, and I was working. And my sweat kind of started smelling like ammonia. I'm thinking, oh no, my colon. But no, it's a byproduct. When muscles start breaking down a bit, you start smelling like ammonia a bit. So it's, but. Yes, yes. Well, you know, physicians are the worst. No, I'm not going to go there. So the stomach and upper GI has very few bugs in it. Yeah. As patient gets older, they're less able to keep these bugs out, and generally H. pylori gets involved. Often they get put on what's called a PEG tube or a G tube. And the G tube, this was another finding, that's where we start feeding the patient or even used as an IV, is the primary source of infection for a lot of elderly people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They have finally found the primary bug behind ulcerative colitis, which is a debilitating disorder, and it's plain old E. coli. So that's one. You know, listening to some of this stuff was a little bit like revisiting my wardrobe from the 1970s. Because some of this stuff I'd come across a long time ago. We knew what worked and what doesn't work, but we didn't know how it worked and the biochemistry behind it. So it's like taking some of my old clothes out and refurbishing it, making it hip again. And that's exactly what this seminar was about, because now we've got a new wardrobe, which really is a lot of old information made new. So it's been freshened up with the research. And really, to maintain tolerance was a theme for one of the researchers. And he made such an impression on me by saying, "Are you really human?" And I kind of sat up. "What do you mean, are you really human?" He says, "Only 1/10 of your DNA is human. 9/10 of your DNA is from bacteria and viruses. Because we have 10 times more bacteria, fungi, and viruses in us than we do have cells in our body." Does that make sense? We are just one floating ecosystem. And we don't think about that, but we are teeming with wildlife and on us. Yeah? Our skin is just loaded as a protective source. That's why these antibacterial soaps are so bad for you. Our gut is filled with 4 to 5 pounds of bacteria. Did you know that stool, 80% of what you see is pure bacteria? Yeah? It is absolutely amazing. So we have this incredible interaction of bacteria all around us, on us, floating around us, giving our body constant signals. And it's what makes us work. It digests our food. It provides our vitamins. It breaks down your hormones. It does so many things. And we never give it the appreciation that we should, because it's gross. But it's not. It's part of us. It's who you are. So you are only 1/10 human in reality. And it's very similar. I like to think about it. I like to go very early on a Sunday morning walk to the end of the driveway and back, just to relax and see the sun come up. And I was doing that a few weeks ago, and it was incredible because the sun was hitting the tops of the trees, and they were just singing. They were all in the tops of the trees, and you could just hear the mating calls go back and forth all over the place, across the houses, over there and over there. It was all around. And I like Sunday mornings, so there's no traffic, and you could just walk along the road and no one bothers you. And wherever I went, it was the same song, and then you see the squirrels skittering, and then I knew underneath the roots of the trees, there are fungi feeding the roots, breaking down the soil, and everything is just kind of working together. And I was trying to look at it as a whole country, and everything was just one big teeming mass that is what we call our ecosystem, and everything's balanced with each other and works with each other and provides for each other, and that's how it works. We are the same way. We are very much the same way, and we have to nurture that. So we are always existing in a state of persistent inflammation because of the assault of the environment and the things that we do, from thoughts to stressful relationships, for instance, to stressful foods, to abuse of ourselves, like trying to run up a mile, up a mountain like I was doing. That was obviously abusive, right? So all these things can set you up for some inflammation, and we're always fighting that. The thing is, you can never get rid of inflammation altogether, but is it in balance with the rest of your body? Is it not out of control? And that was the theme. A researcher from the Netherlands, my home country, pointed out that prenatal nutrition was really important in how we fight inflammation, because he did a study of babies from World War II that were conceived in World War II and were born under severe conditions. And you know, even my parents, they tell me stories like Mom, at the end of the World War II, was 17 years old and weighed about 60-some pounds. You know, it's just phenomenal. Growing up in Haarlem, one of the cities, there was no food. There just wasn't. And so obviously the conditions were pretty extreme for some of these. And then you can see that with these babies that were born during World War II, their chance of contracting MS was 8-fold compared to the average. 8-fold. And they figured out that it was due to lack of methylation pathways, which is breakdown of hormones and other bad substances, and the way DNA repair affects us. So I thought that was interesting. Food poisoning can reset your gut health for decades. This is why whenever we have a really upset stomach, it is so important for you to find your reset point. Probiotics kill the bad bugs. ask us. This is absolutely critical because it can reset what your normal is, and you can go into irritable bowel syndrome. 40% of irritable bowel syndrome patients, which is just chronically diarrhea and then constipation and all kinds of symptoms, 40% of them start with a bout of food poisoning. And it's with them literally for decades. Okay. Okay, Leo Gallant is one of our brightest researchers that we have. He's in his 90s and an incredibly wise man, and he just spoke philosophy. If he comes, you let him speak about anything, whatever he feels like. So, and he basically said this, that functional medicine, studying how everything works together and making it function to its optimum, it's not evidence-based medicine only. He said, but it's principle-based medicine. It's what's right. It's medicine taken to the next level. And I thought it was a cool line, and I wrote it down. Pediatric infections was covered in detail. And these pediatricians covered otitis media a lot. They were very opposed to antibiotics. And it's finally starting to get a little traction. When I started practice 22 years ago here, that year, a note from our own U of M was sent to all pediatricians. I saw the letter recommending that they not use antibiotics for ear infections. 22 years ago. And I said, yeah, well that's cool. That's what we do in the Netherlands. We know it doesn't work. Most of them are viral, and that's cool. It's just today, a generation later, that is starting to get traction that, yeah, maybe antibiotics are not good for ear infections. Maybe we should do something else. So some pediatric researchers were studying how to get rid of otitis media, and all of them agreed on one thing, that the majority of them have a structural blockage of the eustachian tube, and either through soft tissue manipulation or chiropractic or osteopathic manipulation, that was the most effective way for treating otitis media and has the most evidence. Yes. So the breastfeeding reduces risks of otitis media by 3 to 5-fold. And putting in tubes was really not that effective. After the tubes fall out, 90% of them resume ear infections at the frequency that it did before. Large studies showed that. Here's a good one if you have a child and you want to teach them how to swallow pills. This was just practical advice that I wrote it down. I thought, that's a good one. You can have them start swallowing frozen peas for practice on how to swallow pills. Isn't that fun? Just frozen peas. And another one that this pediatrician does is have them try to swallow pills with sparkling water or a little bit of juice with the water, because that fizziness fills their mouth, distracts them, they don't even feel the pill, and in it goes. So, pretty practical, I thought. Okay. Sid Baker, wise old physician in his 80s, great with research. Had a couple of one-liners I want to share with you because they were just wise. Here's one that hit me. Illness is a signal for the patient to change. Wow, isn't that simple? Yeah, isn't it though? If you're ill, you got to change something. Most of us don't. We just keep going. We take a pill, kill the pain, keep going. Illness is a signal to change. You've got to change something. He's also the one that says the Tack Rule. If your patient is sitting on 3 tacks, it takes a lot of aspirin to take away the pain. Yeah? You take away 1 tack, they're not feeling much better. You take away 2 tacks, it's not until you take away the 3rd tack that the patient will be satisfied with you. That's his Tack Rule. And then here's a really good one. This is more for doctors, but I still want to share this one. The bright light I shine on you from my ego can cast deep shadows which can hide the obvious. Whoa. Yes, whoa. And that's right, because if a doctor is really full of themselves and they're not humbled by what they do, they're thinking, oh, well, aren't I bright and aren't I asking the right questions? So I'm shining that bright light on you, which then casts shadows where all the obvious things are being hidden because the doctor's looking for something. Yeah, and so that's an important one. Yeah, name it and blame it and tame it is what most practices do. Another one. Yes. Okay, and he's really into autism. And he showed some research with autism. And he showed some groundbreaking research, which for a guy in his 80s, I was really impressed with because he's taken computers and taken all the data from thousands of autistic kids. He works with autism360.org, which is a great organization. Get on there at some point. At autism360.org, he has introduced this graph, which is three-dimensional, which he takes all the points from emotional health to able to do math to just everything from to digestive symptoms, and he has graphed them according to age, sex, and when you change one thing, what happens to all those things at the same time. I know it sounds simple, but it's never been done before. So now he's got this huge model in this program, say, well, if you bring this change statistically over 1,800 kids, this is what happens. And it's continuously in process. People are involved with this. And we're fine-tuning, using this new program, what we're doing with autistic kids. What works, what doesn't, what works in male, what works in female, what works in the obese autistic kids, what works in the skinny autistic kids. He's got all that in there. So it's an incredible algorithm, which I was really excited to see. Okay, and then came the blow-away topic. Lyme disease, tick-borne infections. Wow. This is an epidemic, folks. It is part of chronic disease. It is caused by something called a spirochete. The spirochete can live by itself for a year on any surface. It can just lay on the ground, hidden to invade you, and it can cause every symptom known to man, from neurological to fatigue, to emotional disturbances, to muscle issues, to death, to you name it. And that rash that everybody talks about when you first get Lyme disease, only present in about 1/3 of them. So very often misdiagnosed. We think that the CDC criteria that puts it out for doctors for diagnosis misses 90% of the cases, 90%. Transplant patients have a high chance for doing this. Anyone who's been a drug addict at some point has an over 70% chance of having Lyme disease, which is just an incredible statistic. And one of the ways to figure out if you have Lyme's disease or not is really simple. Track your temperature every day for a few months. And if you see some kind of rhythm going up and down, because Lyme disease has this trend, infection, non-infection, infection, non-infection. It doesn't even have to go into fever. Now, obviously, you got to make note when you ovulate and when you have your period, right? I mean, that's, but you note to see if there's any fluctuation over that, and that is one way that we can figure out if Lyme's disease is a possibility or not. So, the spirochetes keep on shifting their genes, that's why it's so hard to kill, and they have this incredible biofilm that allows us to not get to it. Most of their symptoms are usually neurological, and thickening of the joints are very common also, and you have to use a lab that specializes in this. A normal lab like Quest will not be able to diagnose this at all, so we have to really use their specialty labs. Ultimately, it's part of many diseases, not the cause, but it was found that with ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, a lot of them actually have Lyme disease also, along with a sensitivity to mold, which was a new thing on ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. In fact, 90% of them, we think, have mold and Lyme involvement. 90%. Brand new finding. So, hepatitis was really covered too. And hepatitis is a silent epidemic. 70% of people with hepatitis do not know it. This is a big one. It is one of the biggest threats to global health. Yes, one of the biggest threats to global health. In Egypt, for instance, 22% of the population, including kids, has hepatitis B or C, which eventually leads to death because you will get liver cancer from this, cirrhosis of the liver. Okay, and 22% is absolutely huge. And there were some researchers there from Egypt that were just emotional because what do we do? Our whole population is dying. This is far worse than AIDS ever was. And this is an unrecognized epidemic. It's a silent epidemic, again, because most of the people that have it don't even know it until it's too late. So there's really a really easy way to become suspicious about hepatitis, and that is when your liver enzymes go a little bit higher than normal. One of the liver enzymes is called ALT, and for men, if it's at 30, and for women, when it's 19, you should get tested for hepatitis. Yeah? This is still within the normal range, folks. This is just getting towards the upper end. The normal range, by the way, is a joke on most blood work, and that's why I always ask for blood work, and so does Dr. Stacy when it comes in, because yeah, it's big enough to drive a Hummer through. Most ranges are normals. 1/3 of patients with hepatitis have fatty liver, of which 10% is hepatitis that is progressive. In other words, they're in their end stage. 40% of the U.S. population now has fatty liver. Okay, 40% of the United States. So it's becoming a problem. Not all of them have hepatitis, but it's something they needed to be checked for. The biggest proportion of hepatitis by far was Asian. Okay, it is sexually transmitted. 90% of transmission from mother to child with hepatitis B. But yeah, 10% of Asians test positive, which I thought was quite shocking. Okay, and then I've got some case studies, but I'm not going to bore you with that. I have too much to go through. If a patient has hepatitis, they never, ever in their life can have alcohol again. Most doctors don't emphasize that enough. If they have Christmas time or it's their birthday and have a glass of wine, that can start up hepatitis all over again. They never must touch alcohol again. So we expect in this country by the year 2030 that half of our hepatitis C patients will have cirrhosis. It's going to be an unsustainable medical crisis in this country that we cannot support financially. Just looking at the statistics by the year 2030. A lot of people who are at risk especially our vets, Vietnam War vets, the Gulf War, our current wars, because there's a lot of blood everywhere. And even the very act of just being airlifted somewhere, just the aerolization from the blades, the blood that gets sprayed into the air and fine particles will infect everybody all around them. So, and with the vets, it's also becoming really a problem. All right. Good. So, mold. The world's expert on mold was there, and he made me feel bad. He was so bright, and I was actually a little bit depressed listening to him. Says, "Oh, I got so far to go," but then I remember, okay, this is the only thing he does. That was kind of, I thought that was kind of made me feel a little bit better. But he testifies worldwide for these mold cases, and mold is so pervasive. If something smells musty, you have mold, or what he said, don't ever call it mold, he says, call it mycotoxins. So then mycotoxins are present if something smells musty. It is a problem for everybody. If you get exposed enough, you become sensitized to it. Just like when you get exposed to enough pollen, eventually you can become allergic to pollen, right? Same thing here. And once that reaction occurs, you're getting into major systemic diseases. Major. And you cannot be exposed to mold again. Because every time you re-expose yourself to mold, you get a higher and higher and higher reaction. And it can be quite a job to figure out where these mold reactions are coming from. There's so many different ones. But really, the best way to figure it out, and this was really valuable for myself because I'm going to be sharing that with patients, is going to Mycometrics Myco, M-Y-C-O, and they do Swiffer testing, where you vacuum with a Swiffer on it into various corners of a room. They give you instructions with it, and you send in those little Swiffer pads to them, and they analyze it. They say it's the best way to test for mold, bar none. So I was happy to be able to get that one. But really, when a patient is reacting to mold, you have what's called a cytokine storm, which is the proteins that communicate to the tissues to become inflamed. And everything can flame up: your nervous system, your eyes, your skin, your organs. And I have seen some incredible illnesses in our office here where literally the whole house had to just be destroyed. There's no way of rescuing it. And it affects everyone. Emotional problems. Yeah. Neurological diseases. Most neurological diseases also have bugs as one of their triggers. Inflammation is the cornerstone of neurological conditions. And for example, with Alzheimer's, PET scans show that with Alzheimer's, the brain is on fire. And mitochondrial, which is our fuel cell of every cell, mitochondrial damage is occurring. And the thing that's behind it, herpes simplex number 2. I remember presenting a topic on Alzheimer's about 25 years ago. And this was at the graduate level. And back then, I zoned in on the role of aluminum in Alzheimer's. Maybe some of you have heard that. And it was proposed back then that the antiperspirants and aluminum cookware and all those sources of aluminum was behind Alzheimer's, because there's a lot of aluminum in Alzheimer brains. Then I saw it go to just the gut. It still is a gut problem, by the way. Then I saw it go to insulin. And yes, it may be an insulin problem also. And now all of a sudden, this researcher throws this herpes simplex at us. So what is going on? You look at all these layers with Alzheimer's. I'm spending a little bit of time on it because this is a major problem, obviously. What is going on? Well, guess what? It's all of the above. It is all of the above. And whatever time or years we tend to live in, and wherever the research dollar has focused on, that's what the information you're going to get. But yes, it is definitely high insulin fueling inflammation. Gluten sensitivity causing a destructive action. But one thing we know about herpes simplex that we didn't know before is that it lays dormant until it seizes the moment in the Alzheimer's patients and triggers the rapid decline that we often see. Is like, hey, what happened to Uncle John? All of a sudden, like that. That's a herpes simplex reactivation. And the neurofibril entanglements that you see is not the cause of Alzheimer's. They've been going after that one for so long now, and I find it incredibly frustrating to see these millions and millions of research dollars being totally wasted to find a drug to get rid of this scar tissue. The scar tissue is there, like cholesterol is. It's a smoke. It's not the original cause. And this guy's research shows that that scar tissue is what houses the part of the nervous system, the part of the immune system that fights herpes simplex. It's the body's response to try to keep it away. And this is why our own Eli Lilly, the drugstore, the drug company, has just pulled a drug which was going to be their major hitter against Alzheimer's, because this drug was able to dissolve this scar tissue in Alzheimer patients, so it was deemed a success. However, these Alzheimer's patients rapidly worsened because of it. Yeah? So as far as what the drug was supposed to do, it did what it was supposed to do, but it's going after the wrong thing, isn't it? You're taking away part of the immune system within the brain, and herpes simplex just goes viral on them, literally, and Alzheimer's got worse. So it was just pulled a few months ago because of that. Okay. So we've also known that MS is linked to vitamin D being down, and we always were trying to figure out, because D is anti-inflammatory, it balances hormones, and there's a definite link there. But the new finding was presented on vitamin D that it also has very intense antimicrobial properties. It's like an antiviral agent, and that's why it helps Alzheimer's so much. So that was it's cool stuff, isn't it? I was really fascinated by all this. For some, chlamydia pneumonia, which is a bacteria, is also involved. And then from Italy comes this shocker. By dilating, okay, no, I'm jumping into MS, okay? MS now. This was very fascinating MS research. Dilating jugular veins, right here, has an incredible success rate with MS. Absolutely incredible. How they got the idea is beyond me. I really don't know. This study, there's been 3 studies so far. They're all relatively small, just in the hundreds of patients rather than thousands. But it decreased relapse rate of MS with incredible results. They also found that the cause of MS, dysbiosis, which means gut issues, leaky gut syndrome, as well as candida, which is yeast overgrowth, and resultant food allergens, especially gluten. We've nailed MS regarding those things. Also, the same bug, chlamydia pneumonia, was involved, and that whole bug infestation with activation of the immune system, so it becomes reactive against certain foods, sets you up for destruction of parts of your nervous system. So they were actually treating MS with 50,000 units a day for 2 years. They reduced, and that's all they did, no dietary modifications. None of that. No antiviral, no antimicrobial, just vitamin D. They were able to reduce relapse rate in MS patients by 41%. The very best, the best drug trial can show is 12%. Why not use vitamin D? I mean, at that level, I mean, what's going to happen? Your child might be born naked? I mean, really, if you stand naked outside at noontime sun, you are producing 1,000 units per minute. That's how much vitamin D you're getting. The average person at the equator gets around 20 to 30,000 units a day, and they have survived pretty well until this moment. So 50,000 units a day, I don't think is going to harm that much. And they were not able to document any ill effects with anyone using this kind of therapy. All right. There was also a link with herpes, again, with MS. And they found that by treating it with lysine, which is an amino acid, which we often use for cold sores, herpes, we were able to reduce MS symptoms as well. And one other one, this was the star of the show, curcumin. You know what curcumin is? Curry, right? At 8,000 milligrams per day, it also does a great job at reducing symptoms of both Alzheimer's and MS. Dr. Perlmutter, who is probably the expert on Alzheimer's and MS and some other neurological conditions, he's a neurologist, also uses oxygen chambers that he puts his patient in. He puts them through 40 treatments of high oxygen, and that creates nervous system repair, and had some fascinating slides on that. And he showed some patients that were literally so badly affected that they were totally non-functional, and then 5 years later was able to produce slides of these same patients, fully functional, vibrant, looking extremely healthy. Wow, it's very emotional to see that, how these people are just rescued. Yeah, some of them teenagers.
What do they use?
Hyperbaric oxygen. He also injected them with glutathione, which is a major detoxification enzyme used by the liver. And he also put them on what we call a ketogenic diet, which allows absolutely no sugars in your diet at all. So very fun. Chronic sinus, I'm going to hit questions after. Chronic sinusitis was also covered. The Germans came in with this one, and they found that 3 years of chronic sinusitis, 96% of them had a fungal component. And if you're dealing with that much, you probably have become sensitive to mold in buildings. Not outside mold, that's different. The ecosystem in buildings is steady. It's the same humidity usually. There's no wind, there's no breeze, there's no rainy days, there's no snow inside. It's a perfect ecosystem for certain molds to replicate, and they're usually the evil ones that are different than the ones outside in the leaves that can create these bad sinus infections. Does that make sense? So again, recommended that you really do a good job eliminating mold from the house, looking for mold, and the Germans came up with a protocol which involved flushing the sinuses with a garlic solution, as well as providing continuous adrenal support, because adrenal fatigue is part of these chronic sinusitis. And almost all of these patients had some sort of mold overgrowth, yeast, candida, within the gut, displacing the good bacteria and giving inflammatory signals to the sinuses. Did you get that? So yeast overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, which really is kind of the same as yeast, toxins within the building. 92% of those that have had it for 3 years or longer. That's a big number. Okay. Oh. This same brilliant neurologist, I just found this one fascinating. You know how they're predicting how supercomputers are going to be as smart as the human brain at some point. You know, I was reading about that. You know, now you can really go, not even close, because he has found by putting different research together that 2 neurons, on average, has 60 connections each that they can put together, which gives you untold amount of combinations, just 2 neurons. But then these neurons, this is a new finding, has something called microtubules, which are so small that they were never discovered until just the last few years. And these microtubules are like little attachments, almost like hairs on the neuron, which also make connections. And they can vary, and that's what gives you the plasticity of the brain. That's what allows us to make new memories, learn new tasks, and with stroke victims, bypass, all these little neurofibrils can change. And just 2 neurons gives you the possibility of 10 to the 81 zeros behind it, different connections. Just 2 neurons, which gives you the power in the brain, which is just so unbelievable that no, a supercomputer will never even come close. Not even close. You knew that, I knew that, but now we know physiologically how that works, and it was just kind of cool to hear that. The power of the brain, wow. Okay, autism. Autism, there's a lot of autism experts out there because obviously this is a disease running rampant, and there's definitely a viral as well as microbial component to this one, very strongly. This was implicated with an abnormal, what all of them have, every single one of them, is abnormal gut and liver function across the board. Loads down the liver to such a degree it cannot handle toxins from the environment. Patients get sensitized by different things. And in order to try to test that hypothesis, this researcher from Western University in London, Ontario, presented his paper. And this was a really nice, almost ordinary guy. These researchers are really weird, by the way. They're very hard to talk to. But he was just nice. And he was able to convince the entire university to work together with their specialties, whether it was pathology, histology, neurology, gastroenterology. He had them all working together on autism, begrudgingly. It took them 5 years to get them together, and then join their research so that they can look at the whole picture. To you and I, that makes total sense. To these researchers, it doesn't. It's just, they're so locked into their field, that's almost heresy. But you could see this researchers being on stage here and looking at the 650 doctors in front of him and saying, I'm home. These people know what I'm talking about, because we're used to putting all these things together. And he was almost in tears talking about this, because finally he had a voice, or he had listening ears for what he had to say. But what he had to say was this, is he was able to determine that the byproducts that are produced by the abnormal gut bacteria in an autistic child is toxic. He was able to isolate those toxins. Propionic acid was one of them. Interesting enough, if you look at propionic acid, this might actually sound faintly familiar, because it's a common preservative in our food too. Isn't that interesting? It's also present in food colors, propionic acid. It was just one of them. He mentioned many of them. And propionic acid, he had a way of just giving these little mice just a puff of it, which would then affect the brain. And you watch behavioral. We know behavior of mice and what mice behavior looks like. But he figured, if I can make mice autistic, then we have at least a model that we can work with. That was his sole goal. It was shocking for me to see how these mice behaved like my autistic patients. It was an absolute revelation, because he would give that mice a little puff, and the one mouse would just become antisocial. Mice are really social creatures. They're sniffing each other's butts, and then they kiss, and they're always worming around each other. That's what they do all day long. And this one mouse, totally, he would start pushing backwards, like this, just like kids do, going backwards and into a corner, and just sat there. Leave me alone. Curled around. That was it. Until propionic acid wore off, and then would revert back to normal activity, which was kind of cool. Revert back to normal activity. Another set of mice would go into another characteristic of autism, and that is repetitive behavior. In other words, would go to one corner of the cage, then sniff, go that one, that one, that one, that one, and repeat that behavior for hours. Just the same and the same and the same. The other ones, he was able to prove the fact that these very, very smart mice, the subpopulations, they could teach them to swim from one area to another and save themselves. And then you change where this higher sand is and lower sand is, and they would really relearn right away and know where to go. It's like hopping from island to island. If you made this mouse autistic, they would keep on repeating going to where it had been. In other words, they're really smart with that one thing, but are unable to learn new things. Object attachment is something I see in almost all of my autistic patients, and it's different for everyone. We have one autistic patient cannot do without his tape recorder. Cannot. He holds on to it, clicks it on, clicks it off, clicks it on, clicks it off, all day long, and that's what comforts him. This object fixation, present in mouse also. They would grab a hold of an object, and no matter what, always there. Just identical to human behavior. It was almost eerie. Yeah. So, but the thing that was really encouraging was the fact that it was reversible. So, autism is also, we often think of autism as very negative. Well, he's got something wrong. He's just not working right. You know what? The impression I got from autism was this: it's too much of a good thing with the brain. It's overactive in some area. Does that make sense? Making it behave a little bit abnormally, obviously. But it's not something is wrong, it's too much of something good. And that's what autism really is. It's also a brain energy shortage. They were able to demonstrate that sugar is not getting to the brain like it should. There's mitochondrial dysfunction, so a slowdown in cellular activity in certain areas, and that creates some of the imbalance that you find characteristic of autism. Across the board, they're pretty much all sensitive to dairy and wheat products. And again, the ketogenic diet seemed to help. This one really kept popping up. And it's something that we do with some of our patients. And I'm afraid, and I'm guilty of driving some of my staff absolutely crazy with some of the changes that I see. But that I do with in lifestyle therapy. We're doing some things new right now, and Tina has been incredibly gracious, just implementing some of my thoughts without questioning why sometimes, which I really appreciate, because there's all these things that I keep floating my way. And wouldn't you know it, at this symposium, I kept hearing this whole thing that we're doing with lifestyle therapy over and over again. The ketogenic diet, helping the nervous system, helping weight loss, helping inflammation. It seemed to be coming at me. Even with the hepatitis, it was coming at me. This is what we do, folks. And it was very gratifying to see that.
So we're not changing anything else?
Not today. So... And some of these speakers are very strong Darwinists, but they came up with a catchy term, which I like, that even if you're not a Darwinist, you can embrace this one. Because with Darwinism, of course, you have natural selection, right? Everybody knows about natural selection and how it alters. And this researcher was stating, he says, we're entering a time where we are engaged in unnatural selection. In other words, chemicals, radiation, our experiment with food from the last 50 years, the vaccination and all the toxins therein is given way to changes in our genetic code, which are permanent, and gives way to a weaker race, which is unnatural selection as far as they're concerned. Thought that was catchy. And last, a paper was presented on stress. And they let this one slip in because it had almost nothing to do with virology, bacterial, or fungal overgrowth. But it did. When a patient is under stress, whether it's emotional, post-traumatic stress disorder from the Gulf War, or a severe viral attack that created, say, mono or chronic fatigue syndrome for 2 years, this stress on the body created permanent changes in a genetic code. We call that banding, where you can see it under electron microscope, which was measurable 2 generations down. Isn't that interesting? So the stresses that we are experiencing as a society today is going to affect 2 generations from now, and who knows how much longer. The study didn't go longer than that. So what are we doing to our offspring and their offspring? What are we doing to them? We can be permanently changing their genetic code, and that is kind of a wake-up call for us as a society, for us as a world, that we really have to preserve that lockbox of that genetic code, that precious thing that we keep passing on, and we're playing with fire when we mess with our lives. So we have quite a responsibility regarding all that. So that's just a small hint of some of the things that I pulled out of here. I'm going to have fun going through it. There's a lot more information on different things that I didn't cover because it really gets into biochemistry, and I know everybody would be half asleep. So I tried to pull out things that you might be interested in, and I'm going to just state this one thing, that whenever you talk about one topic, which you must in order to get a handle on it, pretty soon you start believing that everything is all about bacteria or viruses or mold, and that simply is not true. It's the incredible interaction of the host, us, and the environment, and how we respond to it, that really is what creates us, creates health. And whenever we have a chink in our armor, then there's an opportunity for these bugs to grab a hold of us and start ruling us. And once they are ruling us, it's important for us as physicians and you as patients to recognize what's going on and go against that, whatever's going on. But ultimately, what produces health is still the same thing we've always been preaching. Take care of your gut, stand guard over your emotions, have balance emotionally, spiritually, and physically, eat real food, and just do some of the basics. They have profound implications. One of the biggest weapons, one of the presenters on ulcerative colitis, and he was going on and on about bugs, and then finally, well, what do you do about all this? You know, after he got done with all this fancy biochemistry, he says, here's the recipe for 2 stewed apples every day. I give that to my patients. They have to eat these 2 apples every day. They put cinnamon on it to control their sugar with it. And it gives you the prebiotic for the good bugs to replicate. It's got good fiber. Yes, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. That's what I thought when I was hearing that. He says we have the most research on how apples benefits ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And he says you can put on a little bit of blueberries and blackberries for antioxidant. And you do that along with restricting dairy, gluten, and give probiotics. And that was it. That was it. And I thought, well, shoot, my mentor, Dr. Vogel, who wrote some incredible textbooks back in the 40s and 50s, which are still available today, recommended that. So we've kind of come full circle. We've taken folk medicine back out of the closet, dressed it up, and backed it up with research now, and are reapplying that knowledge that our forefathers were always using. And it sure is gratifying to see that. And of course, we've added new things to that. And it's nice to see the clothes from the 1960s and 70s being refurbished and put back into use again. So, any questions on any of that? Yes?
Preventatively, can we do to prevent fatty liver?